The afternoon rush at Westfield Pharmacy was in full swing when 79-year-old Robert Sullivan slowly made his way through the automatic doors. The elderly veteran moved carefully with his aluminum walker, each step deliberate and measured. His Vietnam War cap sat proudly on his gray head, and his worn but clean clothes told the story of a man living on a fixed income who still maintained his dignity despite the challenges life had thrown at him. Robert had been coming to this CVS-style pharmacy for nearly 5 years, ever since his doctor prescribed medication for the PTSD that had haunted him since his return from Southeast Asia. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the anxiety attacks that could strike without warning, all reminders of the 18 months he'd spent as a Navy corpsman, treating wounded Marines under enemy fire in some of the most dangerous territory of the Vietnam War. The walk to the pharmacy took Robert nearly 20 minutes from his small apartment 3 blocks away, but he made the journey twice a month without complaint. The medication Martinez prescribed was the only thing that allowed him to sleep through the night without being awakened by memories of wounded Marines crying out for help in rice paddies and jungle clearings half a world away. Some nights he could still hear their voices calling his name, begging for morphine, for water for their mothers. Behind the pharmacy counter, technician Brandon Walsh was having a particularly stressful day. At 26 years old, he'd been working at Westfield for 2 years and had developed what he considered a keen eye for spotting problematic customers. The pharmacy was understaffed. The computer system had been down for an hour that morning, and Brandon was already running behind on his quotas for prescription processing. In his experience, elderly patients were often confused about their medications, slow to process transactions, and frequently tried to fill prescriptions that raised red flags for potential drug abuse. He'd attended a mandatory training session about prescription fraud just the month before, and the instructor had emphasized the importance of being vigilant about suspicious prescriptions, especially those for controlled substances. When Robert approached the counter and slowly pulled out a crumpled prescription paper from his jacket pocket, Brandon's suspicions were immediately aroused. The medication was lorazepam, a controlled substance commonly prescribed for anxiety disorders, and the dosage seemed higher than what Brandon typically saw for someone Robert's age. To Brandon's untrained eye, any prescription for anxiety medication from an elderly person looked potentially suspicious, especially when that person appeared to be of modest means. Brandon had seen enough episodes of television shows about prescription drug abuse to feel confident in his ability to spot a drug seeker. In his mind, people who looked like Robert, elderly, poorly dressed, with obvious mobility issues, were exactly the type who might try to obtain medications illegally, to sell on the street, or to feed their own addictions. Brandon asked, though his tone suggested he'd rather not. His body language was already defensive, his arms crossed as he looked down at the elderly veteran with barely concealed impatience. "Good afternoon," Robert replied with the polite courtesy that had been drilled into him during his military service. "I need to fill this prescription, please. Dr. Martinez said it should be ready for pickup today. I called yesterday to make sure it would be prepared." Brandon took the prescription and examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, holding it up to the light and checking the paper texture as if he were authenticating currency. He had learned this technique during his training, but he was applying it with far more suspicion than the situation warranted. "This looks questionable to me," he announced loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. "The writing seems off, and this dosage is pretty high for someone your age. Are you sure this is legitimate?" Robert felt his face flush with embarrassment as other customers turned to look. "Sir, I can assure you that prescription is legitimate. Dr. Martinez at the VA hospital has been my physician for 6 years. He adjusted the dosage last month because my symptoms have been getting worse." "Right," Brandon said dismissively. "That's exactly what someone with a fake prescription would say. We see this all the time, elderly people trying to get drugs they can sell or abuse. The handwriting on this looks like it could have been altered." The accusation hit Robert like a physical blow. In his 79 years of life, he had never been accused of drug-seeking behavior or attempting to defraud anyone. The medication he was trying to fill was the only thing that allowed him to sleep through the night without being awakened by memories of wounded Marines crying out for help in rice paddies half a world away. "Son," Robert said, his voice trembling slightly with hurt and frustration, "I served my country for 2 years in Vietnam. I've been taking this medication as prescribed by a VA doctor for anxiety related to my military service. I'm not trying to deceive anyone. Brandon's response was swift and cruel. Look, old man, I don't care what stories you want to tell about your supposed military service. Half the homeless guys who come in here claim to be veterans when they're trying to score drugs. This prescription looks fake, and I'm not filling it. What Brandon didn't know was that 6 men in civilian clothes had been standing in the vitamin aisle for the past 10 minutes waiting for their own prescriptions to be filled. They weren't ordinary customers, they were United States Navy SEALs on shore leave, and they had just witnessed every moment of the humiliating exchange between the pharmacy technician and the elderly veteran. But what happened next would change everything for everyone involved. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez was the first to step forward. At 34, he was the senior member of SEAL Team 3, with 6 deployments and a Silver Star earned in operations he couldn't discuss. His teammates followed his lead. Petty Officer First Class David Chen, Petty Officer First Class James Wilson, Petty Officer Second Class Carlos Martinez, Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Park, and Petty Officer Third Class Michael Thompson. "Excuse me," Rodriguez said, approaching the pharmacy counter with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with this gentleman." Brandon looked up from Robert's prescription, annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, this is a private matter between me and this customer. Please step back and wait your turn." "Actually," Rodriguez replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone in the pharmacy pay attention, "when you publicly accuse a veteran of drug-seeking behavior and question his service record, it becomes everyone's business, especially ours." Chen stepped forward, pulling out his military ID. "Petty Officer First Class David Chen, United States Navy SEALs. We've been standing here listening to you humiliate this veteran for the past 5 minutes, and we're not going to tolerate it anymore." The pharmacy had grown quiet as other customers sensed that something significant was happening. Several people had pulled out phones to record what was clearly becoming a confrontation between military personnel and a pharmacy employee. Brandon's confidence began to waver as he found himself facing 6 obviously fit young men who carried themselves with unmistakable military precision. "Look, I'm just doing my job here. This prescription looks suspicious, and I have every right to question it." "What makes it look suspicious?" Wilson asked, his tone deceptively calm. "The fact that it's prescribed by a VA doctor for a veteran who needs medication for service-connected PTSD? The handwriting looks altered," Brandon insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction, "and the dosage seems too high for someone his age." Martinez pulled out his phone and began scrolling through information. "Sir, are you a licensed pharmacist?" "I'm a pharmacy technician," Brandon replied defensively. "So you're not actually qualified to make clinical decisions about prescription validity or appropriate dosages," Martinez continued. "That would be the pharmacist's job, correct?" Before Brandon could answer, Wilson turned to Robert with obvious respect. "Sir, what's your name and service record?" Robert looked at the 6 young SEALs who had stepped forward to defend him, touched by their intervention but embarrassed by the attention. "Robert Sullivan. I served as a Navy corpsman with the 3rd Marine Division in Vietnam." The reaction from the SEALs was immediate and profound. They straightened their postures, and their expressions shifted to one of deep respect. Every SEAL knew the legendary reputation of Navy corpsmen who had served with Marine units in Vietnam. They were among the most decorated and respected members of the naval service. "Sir, what decorations did you earn during your service?" Rodriguez asked respectfully. Robert hesitated, not because he was uncertain about his record, but because he had learned over the years that talking about his military awards often made people uncomfortable or skeptical. "I received a Silver Star and a Purple Heart during my deployment," he said quietly. The words hit the SEALs like a thunderbolt. The Silver Star was the 3rd highest military decoration for valor, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat. In the entire pharmacy, the only sound was the quiet hum of the air conditioning as everyone absorbed what they had just heard. "Sir," Chen said with profound respect, "would you be willing to tell us how you earned the Silver Star?" Robert looked around at the crowded pharmacy, aware that dozens of people were now listening to their conversation, many of them recording with their phones. "There was an incident in November 1970, he began reluctantly. "My Marine unit was ambushed near Da Nang. We had multiple casualties, and the wounded were pinned down by enemy fire." He paused, his weathered hands gripping his walker more tightly as the memories came flooding back. "I made several trips into the kill zone to retrieve wounded Marines. On my fourth trip, I was hit by shrapnel in my leg and shoulder, but I managed to get the last wounded Marine to safety." "How many Marines did you save, sir?" Thompson asked. Though he was the youngest SEAL at 23, his voice carried the respect that all military personnel held for combat medics. 11, Robert replied simply. 11 Marines made it home to their families because of that day. The pharmacy was completely silent now. Even Brandon had stopped pretending to work as he listened to Robert's understated description of extraordinary heroism. Other customers were openly wiping away tears as they realized they were in the presence of a genuine American hero. Rodriguez stepped forward and, without hesitation, rendered a perfect military salute to Robert. One by one, his 5 teammates followed suit, standing at attention in the middle of the pharmacy and saluting a man who had earned their deepest respect 50 years before any of them were born. Robert slowly straightened his shoulders and returned the salute with the precision that 5 decades hadn't erased from his muscle memory. The sight of 6 elite Navy SEALs honoring a Vietnam War hero brought audible gasps from witnesses, and several customers began applauding. But the SEALs weren't finished addressing the situation. Rodriguez turned to Brandon with barely controlled anger. "So let me understand this correctly. You just accused a Silver Star recipient, a man who saved 11 Marines' lives under enemy fire, of being a drug-seeking fake veteran." Brandon's face had gone completely white as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. I didn't know," he looked. I thought." "You thought what?" Martinez pressed. "You thought that because he's elderly and doesn't dress expensively, he must be lying about his military service." Wilson pulled out his phone and showed Brandon the screen. "Sir, do you know what a Silver Star represents? It's awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. Only about 100,000 people have received it since World War I. You just accused one of our nation's greatest heroes of prescription fraud, Huck. But the story was far from over, and what happened next would shake the entire pharmacy chain." By this time, the commotion had drawn the attention of the head pharmacist, Dr. Sarah Kim, who emerged from the back office to see what was happening. Kim was a 15-year veteran of the profession and immediately recognized that something serious was taking place. "What's going on here?" Dr. Kim asked, taking in the scene of 6 military personnel surrounding her technician and an elderly customer. Rodriguez addressed her with professional courtesy. "Ma'am, I'm Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, U.S. Navy SEALs. Your technician has just accused this Silver Star recipient of prescription fraud and refused to fill a legitimate prescription from a VA doctor." Kim's expression immediately shifted to one of horror and embarrassment. "Mr. Sullivan, is this true?" she asked Robert. Robert nodded quietly. The young man said my prescription looked fake and that I was probably a homeless person pretending to be a veteran to get drugs. Kim took the prescription from Brandon's hands and examined it carefully. The prescription was clearly legitimate, printed on official VA letterhead with all the appropriate security features, and signed by a licensed physician with whom the pharmacy had a long-standing relationship. "This prescription is completely valid," Dr. Kim announced loudly enough for all the witnesses to hear. "Dr. Martinez has been prescribing medications through our pharmacy for years, and this bears all the hallmarks of a legitimate prescription." She turned to Brandon with visible anger. "Not only did you refuse to fill a valid prescription, but you publicly humiliated a veteran and made accusations that could have serious legal consequences for both you and this pharmacy." Chen stepped forward with his phone still recording. "Ma'am, we want to ensure that this incident is properly documented. This veteran deserves better treatment than what he received today." Other customers in the pharmacy began to voice their support for Robert. An elderly woman approached him and said, "Sir, thank you for your service. My husband was also in Vietnam, and he never came home. Men like you are heroes." A middle-aged businessman put down his prescription and walked over. "Mr. Sullivan, I'd like to pay for your medication today. It's the least I can do for someone who served our country with such distinction." But Dr. Kim was already taking action. "Mr. Sullivan's prescription is free today, and I'm implementing a new policy to ensure this never happens again. Brandon, you're suspended pending a full investigation of this incident." Brandon tried to protest, but Dr. Kim held up her hand. "What happened here today is completely unacceptable. You made assumptions based on age and appearance, refused to fill a valid prescription, and publicly humiliated a Silver Star recipient. Your actions could have resulted in a veteran going without essential medication for a service-connected condition." Rodriguez addressed the crowd that had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Robert Sullivan, United States Navy corpsman, Vietnam War veteran, Silver Star and Purple Heart recipient. This man saved 11 Marines' lives under enemy fire and earned our nation's third-highest decoration for valor." The pharmacy erupted in applause. Customers were standing, clapping, and many were openly emotional as they realized they were witnessing something special. Several people asked to take photos with Robert, who was overwhelmed by the sudden attention and support. Park, who had been quietly observing the entire situation, approached Robert one final time. "Sir, here's my contact information. If you ever face discrimination or need assistance with anything related to your military service, please don't hesitate to call. The Navy takes care of its own, and that includes the corpsmen who took care of Marines." Final rehook. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The incident at Westfield Pharmacy had been recorded by multiple witnesses and went viral with over 18 million views across various social media platforms. The story was picked up by local and national news outlets, sparking nationwide conversations about how veterans are treated in civilian settings and the importance of understanding service-connected medical conditions. Robert Sullivan became an unexpected advocate for veteran healthcare rights, speaking at community events and sharing his story to educate the public about PTSD and the challenges faced by aging veterans. The medication that Brandon had refused to fill was critical to managing symptoms that stemmed directly from Robert's combat service, and the incident highlighted how discrimination could literally endanger veterans' lives. Westfield Pharmacy implemented comprehensive training programs for all staff about recognizing and respecting veterans, understanding service-connected medical conditions, and the proper procedures for validating prescriptions. Robert never again faced questions about the legitimacy of his prescriptions, and the pharmacy became known as a veteran-friendly establishment. Brandon Walsh was ultimately terminated from his position after a thorough investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory behavior toward elderly customers and veterans. The incident became a case study in pharmacy schools across the country, teaching future pharmacists and technicians about the importance of treating all patients with dignity and respect. The 6 Navy SEALs stayed in touch with Robert, including him in their unit's social functions and ensuring that he had the support network that many aging veterans lack. They had not only defended his honor that day but had also demonstrated the bonds that connect all who have served, regardless of the era or branch of their service. Most importantly, Robert's story inspired other veterans to speak up about discrimination and to seek the help they needed for service-connected conditions. His courage in sharing his story, despite the initial humiliation he experienced, helped countless other veterans who faced similar challenges. When reporters asked Robert about that day at the pharmacy, he always gave the same answer. "Those young SEALs reminded me that military service creates a family that transcends generations. They didn't just defend me, they defended every veteran who has ever been dismissed or disrespected because of age or appearance." The elderly Silver Star recipient had found more than just medication at that pharmacy. He had found a community that understood the cost of service and the importance of honoring those who had paid it. And in a world that too often overlooks its heroes, Robert Sullivan had been reminded that some people still remember what sacrifice means. If this story moved you, remember that there are veterans in your community who face similar challenges every day. Hit subscribe for more stories that honor those who served, and share this reminder that respect for veterans isn't just about parades and holidays, It's about how we treat them in everyday situations when they need our support the most. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to subscribe and like it.